Welcome everybody. In this video we are going to be looking at some relevant features of European geography. We'll be focusing on stuff that is relevant for the late Middle Ages, looking not only at major waterways and land masses, but also at agricultural zones and demographic data. So all of this is important background information. A lot of European history doesn't make a lot of sense until you recognize some of the interesting features of geography. There are lots of good reasons why there's a heavy focus on what's happening in Italy and the Low Countries, and not a huge emphasis on what's going on in Hungary, for example. And it has a lot to do with just where the economic activity is, where the cities are, and where innovation is occurring. So hopefully that'll all make sense at the end of this video. Oh, that's not what I wanted. So we'll start with looking at waterways. So I'm going to give you the names of all the most important waterways in Europe, and this is important just because I want you to know where the things I'm talking about are happening. And waterways are especially important in medieval and early modern history because until the invention of the railroad, waterways and water transport is the only efficient way to move mass quantities of stuff, whether it's people in transporting armies or it's supplies. Moving stuff over land is insanely expensive. It is not really much of an exaggeration to say that moving stuff by boat is 1,000 times more efficient. It's not that much faster, but you can move way more stuff for the same amount of effort. For example, in England, it was often faster and cheaper and more efficient to sail around England, around the Channel, to the other side than it was simply to load stuff up in a cart and drag it across. This is partially because roads are woefully under-maintained during this time period. In many cases, roads are so terrible that you can't even use them during the rainy autumn and winter. So for example, many armies will simply stop fighting once it gets to be like November because it's simply impossible to move heavy equipment on these muddy, crappy roads. So rivers and seas and other waterways are going to be absolutely crucial to a lot of economic and military activity until the development of railroads in the mid-19th century. So let's get started. So first of all, we've got the Atlantic Ocean. So the Atlantic Ocean is not super important as a trade route or waterway during this time period. The Atlantic is super choppy. There's lots of storms, and most Europeans until 1492 view this as basically just the end of the world. So the Atlantic is not really super important. There is some fishing traffic going on. So you've got the Atlantic there, but not really a major player at this point. So here you've got the North Sea separating the British Isles and Scandinavia. It's a very important fishery, and there's a big industry of Northern European fishermen who fish for herring and stuff like that in here and salt it and then ship that all over Europe. This is particularly important, the fish industry, because the Catholic Church does not allow people to eat meat on Fridays, and this ban is taken very seriously in Europe during this time. However, fish is not considered a meat, so in a way fishermen have kind of a monopoly on animal protein on Fridays. The English Channel, if you had to name one waterway that was disproportionately important in history compared to its size, the English Channel would be up there. At its narrowest point here, it's only like 30 miles across. People have swum it. It's choppy. It's sometimes the winds are so terrible that you have to wait days to get across. And this allows Britain to take a very interesting and different path of development towards modernity than the continental states, partially because it allows Britain to invest heavily in a navy rather than investing heavily in a land army, which has a number of very important ramifications. The Baltic Sea is up here. People are always going to get the Baltic and the Balkans mixed up. Don't do that. The Baltic is a cold, gentle sea, lots of fish, very easy to sail on, limited exposure to storms and stuff like that. And it's going to become a major trade route that connects Eastern Europe to the commercial centers of Western Europe. So what you'll basically see is raw materials like wood and fish and grain flooding out of Russia and Poland and Scandinavia to Western Europe, and Western Europe exporting finished goods like cloth and later on industrial products back to Eastern Europe. The Mediterranean is super important, and at this time period is the central trading network in Europe. With the discovery of the Americas, that is going to change, but as of right now, Europe's lifeline to the rest of civilization, the massive and powerful and technologically advanced civilizations in the Middle East and India and China, is the Mediterranean. So there's going to be lots of commercial activity here, lots of cities, and lots of wealth as the result of these luxury goods that are moving around in the Mediterranean. The Mediterranean is also a fairly gentle sea. It's fairly easy to navigate. And so what you see is a lot of sea traffic and trade in these sheltered seas of the Baltic and the Mediterranean, much less so out here in the choppy, rough Atlantic. That is going to change with Spanish and Portuguese exploration and advances in shipbuilding. But in the late Middle Ages, it's much more limited there. So some smaller seas that, technically are part of the Mediterranean. You've got the Adriatic here, which is a major trade route. Often goods will be shipped from Istanbul here up to the Adriatic to Venice, and then from Venice can be shipped to the rest of Europe. So it's a very busy shipping lane, and much of it is going to be controlled by the Venetian city empire during this time period. You've got the Aegean. The Aegean is this little bit right here that separates Greece from Turkey, and it's kind of on this main line between Istanbul and Venice. You've got the Black Sea here. The Black Sea, also an important trading network. You've got a similar dynamic here as in the Baltic, in that you've got raw materials flowing in from Russia, and finished goods flowing back into to the Black Sea. During this time period, the northern coast of the Black Sea is controlled essentially by the descendants of the Mongol Empire, and I can only imagine the amazing encounters that happen here, because you've got Italian and Greek merchants setting up colonies and essentially like fortresses here on the coast of the Black Sea, and meeting Mongol Khans out in the middle of the steppe, exchanging, like 20,000 bottles of wine for 100,000 skins or something crazy like that. So just the clash of cultures here must have been really something to see. Famously, the Black Death also enters Europe from the Mongol siege of Kaffa, which is a Genoan city here on the Crimean Peninsula. Over here, you've got the Caspian Sea. It's not going to feature very prominently. I just want you to know what that is. Yeah, that's the Caspian Sea there. It's a landlocked sea. I don't know if it even counts as a sea. It might count as a salt lake, but whatever. You've got the Bosporus and the Dardanelles. This is a very narrow channel, even narrower than the English Channel, that separates Turkey from the Balkan Peninsula. Sorry, Iberia. No. Anatolia from the... Man, I'm breaking my own rules. You can make fun of me if you want. It separates the Balkan Peninsula from Anatolia. Very narrow strip. the city of Istanbul is located right there, which allows them to basically lock down and tax any trade moving between the Black Sea and the Mediterranean. And then two very important rivers. Obviously, as you can see on this map, there are a lot of large rivers in Europe. I don't want to make you memorize all of them. You can if you want to. But there's two that are very important. So first we've got the Rhine River. I don't know why I have the Danube underlined here. Let me fix that. So you've got the Rhine River. So the Rhine starts in the Alps near the Swiss city of Basel, and it then flows and widens out and connects Central Europe to the North Sea. The Rhine is a major shipping center, and all up and down the Rhine during this period, minor nobles are building huge fortresses, which allows them to tax the trade that moves up and down the Rhine River. And like every 20 miles, you have to stop and pay taxes at yet another stupid like baron's castle if you want to proceed. They'll even drag chains across the river and force you to stop if you until you pay a toll. So So that's the Rhine River. It's super important. Basically, it is the economic center of Europe, as we'll see later, and it's still a major trade route today. The busiest port city in Europe today is the Dutch city of Rotterdam, which is at the northern terminus of the Rhine River. So it has been continuously for at least 500 years, kind of the main artery of European trade. The other major river that I want you to know about is the Danube. The Danube also starts up at the foothills of the Alps, almost touching the Rhine. So you could basically sail all the way up the Rhine, get onto the Danube, and then sail all the way to the Black Sea, which would actually probably be super cool. But so the Danube is going to be very important. And basically for the entire duration of our course, you're going to see the two states of Turkey and Austria fighting back and forth for control of the Danube. So Austria is going to move out and capture parts of it, and then the Turks are going to come up and capture most of it, and then Austria is slowly going to push them back. It's just a big and important river that you should know about. So now let's talk about land masses. And this is important just because I want you to be able to know where things are when I'm talking about them. So Iceland is not on this map. It's up there somewhere near that red X. Iceland's is not going to feature very prominently in this course. Even today, Iceland's population is only like 300,000 people, which is, smaller than Raleigh. So its ability to have a major impact on European developments is quite limited. A much more important island in terms of historical impact is Great Britain, which you can see there. So Great Britain refers to the big island of the British Isles. It includes the states of England, Wales, and Scotland. And so when I say Great Britain, it means that big island. If I say England, it means one of the states on that great island, or on Great Britain. Which is, of course, a great island. Here we have Ireland. So if you put Ireland and Great Britain together, and along with these other smaller islands, you get the British Isles. So if you want to refer to the whole thing collectively, call it the British Isles. It kind of bothers me when people call all of this England, but yes, I guess it's not a big deal. All right, up here you've got Scandinavia. So Scandinavia is composed generally of three states. So you've got Denmark, which is this little bit down here. And then you've got Sweden and Norway. And the balance of power shifts back and forth between those three countries. Scandinavia also has an incredibly small population, so it's not going to play a major role in most parts of our historical narrative. However, it will be very important at certain points. Sweden, as you'll see later, is going to play an amazing and heroic role in the 30 Years' War. So that's fun. But like Sweden's population at that time is only like 3 million people compared to France's population of 30 million. So kind of no matter how well organized or advanced the Scandinavian countries are, they're just going to run up against a brick wall of population when they try to get involved in European politics. Down here, we've got the Iberian Peninsula. Please don't call this Spain because, I don't want Portugal's feelings to be hurt. This is Iberia. That's what the Romans called this peninsula. And it's going to play it's going to be very, very important in the first half of the course with the rise of the Spanish Empire. And interestingly, Iberia is conquered in the early Middle Ages by the Umayyad Caliphate, and most of it is controlled by Islamic empires or emirates for most of the Middle Ages. And basically from the 800s to 1492, there is a constant crusade, race war. I don't know exactly what you should call it. The Spanish call it the Reconquista, in which allied Spanish kingdoms slowly take back the land from the emirates that control most of the Iberian Peninsula. So Spain has an interesting cultural heritage in that most of the population was at some point probably Islamic. And that might be one reason why the Spanish monarchs kind of overcompensate when it comes to a religious uniformity later on in their history. Here we've got the Italian Peninsula. You can just call it Italy. Italy is now a country, but for a long time it wasn't. It was a fragment of city-states, as we'll see. And famously, it was called by the conservative Austrian foreign minister Clemens von Metternich a mere geographic expression, not a nation, which of course made the Italians quite angry at that time. But so the Italian peninsula is right here at the heart of the Mediterranean, which gives it an advantage in trade, which is one reason why it's going to be such an important place for the Renaissance culture, being right in the mix of everything. It's very rugged terrain. There's a spine of mountains that runs down the middle. So Italy is actually quite hard to unify as a landmass. It makes a lot more sense that you have independent city-states on different coasts all trading rather than trying to unify them. But that will eventually happen. However, only once trains are invented. Here we've got the island of Corsica, which I forgot to underline. Not really that important. It's where Napoleon's born. Pretty small economy, is going to be controlled by France for large parts of the course. Oh, that's not anything. Here's Sardinia. It's south of Corsica. I don't know. I probably won't ever mention it again, but it's there. Here's Sicily. Sicily is a large island. It's important for the production of grain, citrus fruits, and mafiosos. And the mafia is still quite powerful today in Sicily and other parts of southern Italy. The Balkan Peninsula is this big fat peninsula right here that includes Greece and goes kind of all the way up to the tip of the Adriatic and the Black Sea. The Balkan Peninsula is going to be conquered by the Turks and is going to be controlled by the Turks for about 300 years and is slowly going to be reconquered by Christian states, most prominently Austria, but also Russia, and then some other stuff. So the Balkans is because it's ruled by the Ottoman Turks, is going to be kind of excluded from a number of European cultural movements, and is going to be relatively economically backwards compared to the Western European states that emerge. You've got Anatolia here. Anatolia is the heartland of the Ottoman Empire. Also, you can tell from the coloration of the map that this is, once again, super rugged terrain. We're not going to talk about it a whole lot, but I want you to know that's where it is. Don't call it Turkey. I know I called it Turkey earlier in the video. Call it Anatolia. You can also call it Asia Minor, but I don't really know why it's called that. Call it Anatolia. That's what the Romans called it. And then up here, you've got the Caucasus, Caucasia. Don't call it that. The Caucasus, it's this large isthmus between the Black Sea and the Caspian Sea, super rugged mountains, and it's going to form kind of a natural barrier between Russia and the Ottoman Empire. These mountains here are like Rocky Mountain in scale. So trying to get armies over the Caucasus Mountains is going to be pretty difficult and forms kind of like a natural barrier there. Oh, also, it's probably worth noting that the Alps are right here. The Alps do form a little bit of a cultural barrier dividing Italy from Northern Europe. However, it's actually quite easy to pass through them if you know what you're doing. And we'll talk about that more in a minute. So let's talk about agricultural zones. So Europe can be divided into 4 different agricultural zones, and this has major implications for stuff like trade and the development of cities and eventually the power of the states that can develop in these regions. So the first region, and kind of the oldest in terms of like settlement, is the Mediterranean. So the Mediterranean has a kind of continuous like cultural heritage going all the way back to the Phoenicians and the Egyptian states and ancient Greece and Rome and stuff like that. So old cultural roots. And agriculturally, the Mediterranean has been kind of the land of wine and olive oil. The reason for this is that the Mediterranean is pretty dry, and the soils there are not particularly rich. So rather than trying to grow lots of grain, what these places do is they specialize in the production of perennial crops, grapes and olives, also lots of sheep. And then they trade the products that can be produced from these crops, wine, olive oil, and wool, for grain that can be produced in large quantities elsewhere. And this is one reason for the kind of mercantile nature of many parts of the Mediterranean, especially Italy. So this though results in kind of lower population densities in many parts and kind of a pooling of populations around urban centers. Just because you can't sustain as much food, you can't produce as many calories per acre as you can in other regions. The kind of breadbasket of Europe is the Northern European plain that stretches all the way from northern France up through the Low Countries, through northern Germany, and then into Poland and the Ukraine. So this, in some ways, this is a little bit like the American Midwest. It's a little wetter, so it's flat, deep, rich soil with adequate rainfall that you can just produce a huge amount of grain if you plow your fields correctly. And so advancements in agriculture during the Middle Ages allowed for these parts of Europe to begin producing a fairly large food surplus, which then allowed for the growth of populations in these regions. And there's a lot of grain being traded from these regions to other parts. So there's a lot of wine going from Spain in exchange for grain from northern France and Germany and stuff like that. So the main types of food that people would eat here is lots of grain, lots of bread, which you make with your good grain, and lots of beer that you make with your bad grain. So the bad, wet stuff at the bottom of the pile that you don't want to eat, you boil it down into a mash, you add some hops or other stuff, and to make it taste better, and you drink that. That way you don't poison yourself with moldy grain. So anyway, that's the North European plain. Also, it's worth noting that this is excellent cavalry country. This is kind of the heartland of the old knights. It is also excellent country for driving tanks across, as the Germans and the Russians will demonstrate much later. And then up here, this isn't really a real term, but I call this part of Europe cold Europe. Some people have called it the vodka belt. But this is the part of Europe where it's too cold to produce vast quantities of wheat. And so the people here have to rely on lower productivity crops, notably rye, but also oats. And it's also too cold to grow hops, so you don't make beer, because that would just taste like alcoholic oatmeal. And so instead they make vodka once they discover that technology. Which was developed, interestingly, in the Middle East, where alcohol is generally not consumed for pleasure because of Muslim practices. But so anyway, so this is cold Europe. So also much lower population densities, just because you can't produce as much food up here as you can in the Northern European plain. So you've kind of got this sweet spot here in the middle where you can really turn out a lot of food. And also, it's not really a coincidence that you're going to see the most powerful states of modern Europe develop in these areas. Because more food equals bigger cities, equals more innovation and industrialization and all that good stuff. So anyway, and then last of all, it's important to note that large parts of what we consider Europe today were still controlled by Mongol Khanates during the late Middle Ages. So this region here was steppe, and it was dominated by nomadic pastoralists. If any villagers tried to go down there and start farming, they would very quickly be murdered by roving bands or enslaved by roving bands of horsemen, some of more like of Mongolian descent, some of more like European descent. There's a variety of essentially white Mongols known as Cossacks who live here in north of the Black Sea, who will later form an alliance with the Russian Tsars and serve as kind of the Russian cavalry for a long time, which I think is cool. Hang on, I gotta go let my dog out. Go on, buddy. Sorry about that. Okay, so last thing. So I wanted to talk about some demographic trends. So and some important trade routes. So I've already mentioned the Baltic here, and the Mediterranean as kind of the two central trading routes of Europe. And of the two, the Mediterranean is definitely the more important. And then you've got the Rhine River, which flows from Switzerland down to the Low Countries here. So what you see is you basically have these two trade routes connected via the Rhine. And what you can do is really you can just draw a line from Italy up north through England, and that diagonal line is essentially the economic center of Europe. And the closer you are to that line, the wealthier and more advanced the economies will be. So you've got London, Belgium and the Netherlands. So you've got Amsterdam and Antwerp and Rotterdam and Bruges and all of these beautiful medieval towns. Going up the Rhine, you've got cities in Western France and or Eastern France and Western Germany. You've got the Swiss city-states, which are all quite small actually. And then you've got down here in Italy just a huge number of prosperous trading centers, all of which are at war with each other. The most notable being Venice, Milan, and Florence. So that's where the action is. You'll notice that a large number of states do not have any cities. Or any cities over, like over 10,000. So Poland, Austria, Hungary, Greece have none. It is worth noting, though, that the very largest city in all of Europe is actually Istanbul, which is oftentimes not considered in European history because it's controlled by the Ottoman Empire, and I don't know why. I mean, that's a little problematic, actually. But Istanbul dwarfs every other city in Europe. It is a huge, beautiful, sprawling metropolis. The next biggest city is Paris, right here. And then you've got a whole smattering of kind of like third-tier cities after that, including London. So the Mediterranean is the most important trade route, and that helps to explain why there are so many cities clustered around the Mediterranean. That is going to shift as the American colonies are developed, and as trade routes both to India and to the Americas are developed. You're going to see a shift in the relative importance of the Mediterranean. The Mediterranean is going to decline. Many of these Italian cities are going to wane in prosperity. Italy is going to kind of descend into irrelevance politically, and you're going to see a huge shift in the population and in urban centers on the north here. Still following this axis from England down to Italy, but you'd see some of these dots disappear and a lot more dots appear in northern France, the Netherlands and Belgium, and northern Germany, and of course in England also. So anyway, that's what I've got for you guys today. Hopefully you learned some stuff. Hopefully this helps to clarify or my future lectures. So yeah, thanks. Bye.